You are 35 years old, and you have been lying to every single person in your life for the past 5 years. Your clinic door has your name on a brass plaque. Your white coat has your title embroidered above the pocket. Your hospital records list a medical degree from a school you attended for 3 years before the bank stopped calling and started screaming. There's just one problem. You never graduated. You never took your boards. You never got licensed. You walked out of your 3rd year with $180,000 in debt and a transcript that stopped halfway through surgery rotation. How did this happen? Simple. Desperation makes people do insane things. You applied for a medical assistant position in a rural clinic in Oak Haven, a town so far from everywhere that its GPS coordinates feel like a dare. During the interview, the board of directors, 3 exhausted men who hadn't seen a real physician in 11 years, misread your incomplete transcripts. They saw pre-med honors and assumed the rest was just paperwork they hadn't gotten to yet. They called you doctor before you even sat down. You opened your mouth to correct them. Then they mentioned the salary, triple anything you'd seen. Your rent was 3 months overdue. Your car made a sound when you turned left. So instead of telling the truth, you smiled and said thank you. That was 5 years ago. The first few months were the most terrifying of your life. You'd lock yourself in your office between patients, frantically Googling dosages, drug interactions, basic terminology, things you'd half learned in school but never needed to use unsupervised. You learned to speak in careful, confident vagueness. Let's monitor that and follow up in a week. I want to rule out a secondary cause before we commit to a treatment plan. When you had no idea what you were looking at, you became a master of deflection, always finding a reason to refer, to wait, to send someone to a specialist 2 towns over. But here's what nobody tells you about being a fraud. You get better at it, way better. After 1 year, you could diagnose and treat every common rural ailment, flu, sprains, minor lacerations, hypertension, with genuine competence. After 2 years, you'd studied enough to manage chronic conditions, write appropriate prescriptions, coordinate specialist care. After 3 years, you were running the most efficient clinic the county had seen in decades because you worked twice as hard as any real doctor to hide the gaps in your training. The paranoia became your greatest asset. While real physicians got comfortable and complacent, you treated every single patient like your entire life depended on it, because it did. Your system was meticulous. You only accepted cases within your actual knowledge base. You developed a detailed understanding of every local pharmacist, every specialist in the region, not from a residency network, but from obsessively building relationships and quietly extracting expertise over dinner and phone calls. You hired a physician's assistant with 20 years of experience, telling her you valued collaboration when really you needed someone to catch your blind spots before they became disasters. The money came in. You moved to a better apartment. You bought a car with a clean title. Your parents stopped asking when you'd finish school. At the county health fair last spring, the mayor publicly thanked you for transforming the community's access to care. You gave a humble speech while your stomach twisted like wire. Then came the Kellerman case. It started routine enough. 8-year-old girl, abdominal pain, brought in by her mother on a Wednesday afternoon. You'd seen 100 cases like it, appendicitis symptoms but soft. You ran your checks, everything pointed to early stage. Standard protocol? Prep for appendectomy, transfer to county hospital for surgical backup. Except the snowstorm that had been building all week arrived in the next 4 hours and turned every road out of Oak Haven into a mirror. The helicopter pad was iced over, the county hospital was unreachable, and the girl's condition was escalating faster than the weather. You tried everything to buy time. IV fluids, pain management, monitoring. You called every number you had, the county hospital, state emergency services, the specialist in Milford who'd become something like a mentor over the years. The lines were jammed or dead. Your PA, a woman named Rosa, who had serious eyes and 20 years of emergency experience, watched you work the phone. She'd been quietly watching you for months. Something had been off to her, nothing she could name, just a pattern.
the way you always positioned yourself as the coordinator rather than the cutter, the way you knew everything about medicine except the things you could only learn by doing. She asked you quietly, "When did you last perform an appendectomy?" You didn't answer. Your hands were already shaking, and she could see it. The girl was on the table, the storm was locked outside, and you were standing in a fully equipped surgical suite, understanding with perfect crystalline clarity that you were not a surgeon. You were a man in a costume, and a child's life was on the line. This is the moment every fraud eventually reaches, the one they can't deflect, the one that turns the costume into a trap. You looked at Rosa and made a decision. Not the calculated survival decision you'd been making for 5 years, something else. You told her the truth, not the careful version, the whole story, the incomplete degree, the misread transcript, the 5 years of winging it through obsessive preparation and sheer terror, the fact that you had never performed a solo surgery in your life. She didn't gasp, she didn't back away. She went very still for about 4 seconds. Then she scrubbed in and talked you through every step. Rosa had assisted in over 300 abdominal surgeries. She knew the procedure the way you knew deception, completely, fluently, without having to think. She guided your hands. She called the steps before you needed them. You followed. You didn't lead, you followed. And 2 hours later, the girl's appendix was out, clean, no complications. When it was done, you peeled off your gloves and stood in the hallway and shook for about 10 minutes straight. Rosa came out and stood next to you. She didn't say anything for a long time. "You're going to need to fix this, not tomorrow, now." That night, you did something you'd never done. You called the state medical board's after-hours line and asked to speak with someone from the licensing division. The woman on the phone sounded confused. People don't typically call voluntarily. You told her you needed to report a violation, your own. She transferred you 2 times before someone picked up who understood what you were saying. The next morning, you were in a federal building confessing everything. The investigator kept stopping you to ask if you understood you were admitting to crimes. You said yes, you understood perfectly. "Why are you telling us this?" she asked. "Because a child was on a table last night, and I couldn't protect her alone. Because Rosa knows. Because I've been one bad night away from this moment for 5 years, and I'm exhausted. Because it's wrong." She made calls. Within hours, you were talking to prosecutors who were visibly baffled. People like you don't walk in. They fight every inch, lawyer up, go to trial. Your voluntary cooperation was so unusual, it actually worked in your favor. The deal took 3 weeks to negotiate. Guilty plea to fraud and loan-licensed medical practice, 14 months in minimum security, 5 years of probation, permanent revocation of any right to practice medicine, full restitution to the clinic and county health board, and one additional requirement. You had to personally contact every patient you'd treated and disclose what you had done. Give them the option to pursue complaints or civil action. That part was worse than prison. Some patients cried, some screamed, a few threatened to find you personally. Most just went silent on the phone and hung up. A surprising number said their care had been good, that they didn't know what to do with what you told them, and they'd have to think about it. The girl's mother called you a monster, then called you back an hour later and said she didn't know what to say because her daughter was alive. You liquidated everything. The apartment, the car, the embroidered white coat, it all went towards restitution. You reported to prison at 36 years old with 1 bag and a strange, unexpected feeling of weightlessness. 14 months is long enough to think, really think, about who you were, who you pretended to be, who you might still become. The other inmates thought your story was bizarre. You went to prison for pretending to be a doctor? In a place full of people who'd done far worse, your hustle seemed almost philosophical to them. Maybe it was, but it was yours. When you got out, you were 38 with a felony record and no professional future in medicine. You took a job in medical equipment logistics, loading, shipping, inventory. Your coworkers were half your age. Your apartment was a studio with a radiator that clicked all night. Your car was old enough to vote. And every single night, You slept straight through until morning. No cold sweat dreams about someone asking a question you couldn't answer. No panic attacks before patient appointments. No performance of being someone you weren't, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You were broke. You were a felon. You were working a job that had nothing to do with the person you'd spent 5 years pretending to be. But for the first time since that interview room, you were actually yourself, not a fraud, not an imposter, just someone who'd made catastrophic decisions and finally, slowly, honestly paying for them. Turns out there's a kind of freedom in that, even when it costs you everything. Some nights you pass a hospital and your hands go steady at your sides, that old muscle memory, the part of you that learned to perform competence so well it became something close to real. And you wonder what might have been different if the bank hadn't called, if you'd finished the degree,
If the board hadn't misread the transcript. But that kind of thinking doesn't go anywhere useful. You made the choices you made, the town needed a doctor, and you needed to survive. And for 5 years, those two facts fit together like a lock and a stolen key. Until they didn't. Until a girl was on a table in a snowstorm. And the only honest thing left was the truth. You don't get to be the hero of this story. You don't get to be the villain either, really. You're just a person who ran from math until the math caught up, and then finally stopped running. That's not redemption. That's just what living with it actually looks like.